Captain Jake Morrison had served 15 years in the United Earth Fleet, and he thought he had seen everything the galaxy could offer. But the message that arrived on that quiet Tuesday morning proved him completely wrong. Admiral Nancy Price appeared on his screen with an expression he had never seen before. A mixture of disbelief and cautious hope that made him sit up straighter in his chair. "Jake, we have received an unusual request from the Zerithian Empire," she began, her voice carrying the weight of something significant. "Their Empress has asked for a human trainer to work with her youngest daughter, Princess Valera, who's been declared unfit for succession by their warrior council." Jake leaned forward with curiosity filling his mind, because the Zerithians were one of the most powerful species in the known galaxy. Their empire spanning over 40 star systems, and their warriors feared across every sector of space. Why would they want a human? He asked, genuinely puzzled by this strange request. The Zerithians have training academies that have produced legendary warriors for thousands of years. Because those academies have failed with this particular princess, the Admiral explained with a slight shake of her head. She has been through every program they have, and nothing has worked. So now they are desperate enough to try something completely different. The Zerithians stood 8 feet tall on average, with deep blue skin that shimmered like ocean water and silver eyes that could see in complete darkness. And their entire culture revolved around martial excellence and warrior traditions that stretched back millennia. They viewed humans as young and primitive, a species that had only ventured into space a few centuries ago. So the idea of them asking for human help was almost unthinkable. "You want me to train an alien princess?" Jake asked, still trying to process this unexpected assignment. "I want you to try." The Admiral replied with a hint of a smile. "You have a reputation for transforming hopeless cases into capable soldiers. And right now, that reputation has reached Zerithian ears. So they specifically requested you." Jake arrived on Zareth Prime 5 days later, after a journey through 3 different jump gates and a final approach that took him past defense platforms bristling with weapons. And the planet itself was breathtaking in a terrifying way. The Imperial Palace rose from the surface like a mountain of black crystal, its spires reaching toward the purple sky and its walls carved with images of ancient battles and legendary heroes. And everything about it was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Guards in ceremonial armor watched him with barely hidden contempt as he walked through corridors wide enough for vehicles to pass through, their silver eyes tracking his every movement with predatory attention. He was led to a training courtyard where someone waited for him. And when he saw Princess Valera for the first time, he understood immediately why the Zerithians considered her a failure. She was small for her species, barely 6 feet tall when others of her kind towered above 8 feet. And her pale blue skin suggested she spent most of her time indoors, away from the harsh sunlight. And her shoulders curved inward as if she was trying to make herself even smaller. Her silver eyes darted away from his gaze the moment they made contact, and her hands trembled slightly at her sides. And everything about her posture screamed fear and defeat. "You are the human," she said in a quiet voice that was beautiful but carried no strength behind it. "Captain Jake Morrison," he replied with a respectful bow that he had practiced during the journey. "I am here to help you prepare for the Ascension trials." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound without any joy in it. A laugh that spoke of years of disappointment and shame. "Help me?" she asked with disbelief coloring her words. "I am the disgrace of my bloodline, Captain, and my sisters completed their warrior trials when they were children. But I am 19 years old, and I still cannot hold a blade without my hands shaking." Jake studied her carefully, seeing past the surface to something underneath that the Zerithians had apparently missed. Because he had trained hundreds of recruits over the years, and he recognized the signs of someone who had been broken down without ever being built back up. "Show me your training facility," he said, wanting to understand what she had been through before he decided how to proceed. What he found confirmed his suspicions about everything, because the Zarathian training method was brutal beyond anything humans would consider acceptable. Designed to eliminate weakness through constant punishment and humiliation, recruits who failed were mocked publicly in front of their peers, and those who showed fear were beaten until they learned to hide it behind masks of false courage. And the entire system was built on the idea that strength came from destroying weakness rather than transforming it. For most Zarathians, this approach worked perfectly, because their species was naturally aggressive and their instincts drove them toward combat. But Princess Valera was different in ways her trainers had never understood. Her psychological profile showed remarkable intelligence and deep empathy, and a nervous system more sensitive than typical for her kind. And the Zarathians had been trying to shape her into something she could never be, instead of helping her become what she was meant to be. "We are going to do things very differently," Jake announced to the assembled court advisors, who watched him with skepticism written across their blue faces. "For the first 2 weeks, there will be no combat training at all." The reaction was immediate and angry, with Lord Corvin, the Master of War, stepping forward with fury blazing in his silver eyes. "You would waste precious time with softness?" he demanded in a voice that echoed through the chamber. "The princess needs discipline and punishment, not gentle treatment from a primitive human." Jake met his gaze without backing down even slightly, because he had learned long ago that showing weakness to aggressive species only invited more aggression. "My lord, your methods have had 19 years to produce results, and they have failed completely," he said calmly but firmly. "Give me 100 days to try something different, and if I fail, you can return to your traditional approach with nothing lost." The Empress watched from her throne with ancient eyes that had seen countless conflicts and decisions, and she raised one hand to silence the angry murmurs filling the chamber. "Let the human proceed with his methods," she commanded in a voice that allowed no argument. "We've already tried everything else, so we have nothing left to lose by trying this." Jake turned to look at Princess Valera, who stood trembling slightly with fear and something else in her eyes. Something that might have been the faintest spark of hope. 100 days, he said to her with quiet confidence. "That is all I need to show you who you really are." She did not respond, but she did not look away either. And in that small act of courage, Jake saw the first sign that maybe this impossible mission might actually succeed. Jake began his training with something that confused everyone in the Zarathian court, because instead of weapons and combat drills, he started with simple conversation. Every morning, he and Valera would walk through the palace gardens while he asked her questions about her life and her thoughts and her fears. And at first, she was hesitant to answer because she expected some kind of trick or trap. "Why do you want to know these things?" she asked on the 5th day of their walks together. "No trainer has ever cared about what I think or feel, because your mind and your feelings are the foundation of everything else," Jake explained as they passed beneath trees with silver leaves that chimed softly in the wind. "On Earth, we learned long ago that you cannot build strength on top of a broken spirit. So first we must heal, and then we can train." He told her stories about human history, about athletes who had overcome terrible injuries and soldiers who had conquered their fears and ordinary people who had done extraordinary things when everyone expected them to fail. "You have failures in your history?" Valera seemed genuinely shocked by this idea. "Humans fail at things?" "We fail constantly," Jake admitted with a slight smile. "The difference is that we do not see failure as an ending, because we see it as information that teaches us how to succeed the next time." This concept was completely foreign to Zarathian culture, where failure meant shame and disgrace. And Valera listened with growing wonder as Jake described a species that had built its entire civilization on learning from mistakes. On Day 14, Jake introduced physical training, but nothing like what Valera had experienced in her years of traditional instruction. He started with basic movement exercises, teaching her to understand her own body and work with it rather than fighting against its nature. Your trainers spend years trying to make you move like a typical Zerethian warrior, he observed during their first physical session. But your body is different from theirs, lighter and more flexible. So we need to find a fighting style that uses your natural advantages instead of ignoring them. He drew on human martial arts, traditions that have been developed over thousands of years, adapting techniques from judo and aikido and other styles that emphasized using an opponent's strength against them. These methods were perfect for someone who would never match a typical Zerethian in raw power, because they transformed size disadvantage into tactical advantage. Illyra struggled at first because years of negative conditioning had taught her to expect failure, and those expectations became self-fulfilling as she tensed up and made mistakes before she even tried. But Jake responded with patience that astonished everyone who watched their sessions, never showing frustration or disappointment no matter how many times she failed. Again, he would say calmly after each mistake, and his voice carried the steady confidence of someone who knew that success would eventually come if they just kept working. By Day 30, something remarkable began to happen, because Valera landed her first successful throw during a practice session and sent Jake tumbling across the training mat. She stood frozen in complete shock, unable to believe what she had just accomplished with her own hands. "That was excellent," Jake said as he climbed back to his feet with a genuine grin spreading across his face. "Now do it again." She did it again and then again, and with each successful repetition, her confidence grew a little stronger. The mental training progressed alongside the physical work, because Jake knew that the mind was just as important as the body in any kind of combat. He taught her meditation techniques that human special forces had developed over centuries, methods for controlling fear and focusing attention under extreme pressure. He introduced her to visualization, having her imagine successful outcomes in vivid detail before attempting difficult tasks. Your brain cannot fully tell the difference between vivid imagination and real experience, he explained during one of their sessions. Every time you visualize success, you are building pathways in your mind that make actual success more likely. Valera practiced these techniques every night before sleep, imagining herself moving with grace and power and defeating opponents who had always seemed impossibly strong. Lord Corvin observed a training session on Day 42, his massive frame casting a shadow across the practice area as he watched with crossed arms. His expression shifted from open contempt to reluctant interest as he saw the princess flow through a series of movements that would have been completely impossible just 6 weeks earlier. "She's still not a true warrior," he said grudgingly when the session ended. "Not yet," Jake agreed without any defensiveness in his voice. "But she's becoming something that might be even more valuable in the end." "And what exactly is that?" the War Master demanded with suspicion in his silver eyes. Jake watched Valera execute a perfect evasion technique, her body moving with a grace that seemed almost like dancing. "Someone who knows exactly who she is and what she is capable of achieving," he replied thoughtfully. "In my experience, that kind of certainty is more dangerous than any weapon." The court began to take notice as the days passed, and the changes in Valera became impossible to ignore, because the princess who had once flinched at loud noises now held her ground when warriors walked past her. Posture had transformed from hunched and defeated to straight and confident, and her silver eyes now met the gazes of others instead of darting away in fearsome. Members of the court were pleased by this development. Seeing hope for a princess they had written off as hopeless, but others were troubled by what they saw, because it transformed Valera, would disrupt the careful political arrangements that had been built on the assumption of her weakness. Princess Myra, the eldest daughter and assumed heir to the throne, watched her younger sister with growing unease, because she had spent her entire life believing she had no real competition for succession. The idea that the family disgrace might actually become a threat was something she could not accept, and so she began to plan, determined to remind everyone that Valera was still the weakest member of the royal bloodline. On day 55, Myra issued a public challenge, inviting Valera to a sparring match under the pretense of sisterly bonding and friendly competition. The invitation could not be refused without admitting cowardice, and everyone in the court knew exactly what Myra intended to accomplish. She wanted to humiliate her sister in front of everyone, and prove that no amount of human training could transform a weakling into a warrior. Jake pulled Valera aside the night before the match, his face serious but not worried. "Your sister is going to try to destroy you tomorrow," he said honestly. "She is faster and stronger and more experienced than you, and you cannot beat her in a straight fight." Fear flickered in Valera's silver eyes, the old fear that had haunted her for so many years. "Then what should I do?" she asked with her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not try to beat her," Jake replied with calm certainty. "You try to survive, and you last as long as you can. And you show everyone watching that you are not the same person you were 55 days ago." He put his hand on her shoulder and looked directly into her eyes. "Sometimes victory is not about winning," he said. "Sometimes victory is simply refusing to be destroyed." The grand arena was filled with spectators when Valera entered, because word had spread throughout the palace that Princess Myra intended to put her younger sister back in her proper place. Hundreds of Zarathian nobles sat in the elevated viewing platforms, their silver eyes fixed on the combat floor below, and servants moved quietly through the crowd offering refreshments, while whispered conversations filled the air with anticipation. Jake found a position near the front where Valera could see him if she needed reassurance, and he stood with his arms crossed and his expression calm despite the tension building in his chest. Princess Myra entered first, striding onto the combat floor with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat, her tall, muscular frame moving with predatory grace as she acknowledged the cheering crowd. She had completed her own warrior trials at the age of 14, and in the years since she had become one of the finest fighters in the Empire, never losing a single combat match against any challenger. Vale entered next, and the crowd fell into an uncomfortable silence as they watched the smaller princess walk toward the center of the arena. But Jake noticed something different about her today, something that had not been there when they first met, because her shoulders were back and her head was held high and her steps carried purpose rather than hesitation. She was still afraid. He could see that clearly, but she was no longer controlled by that fear. That the referee announced the rules in a booming voice that echoed through the vast space. And then he stepped back and raised his hand to signal the beginning of the match. Myra attacked immediately, expecting to end this embarrassment quickly and decisively, her blade flashing toward Valera's neck in a strike that would have connected easily 2 months ago. But Valera was not there. She had moved with the fluid grace that Jake had taught her, sliding around her sister's attack and creating distance before Myra could follow up with a second strike. The crowd murmured in surprise because they had expected the younger princess to crumble at the first assault. Myra's eyes narrowed with irritation as she launched herself forward again, her blade cutting through the air in a complex pattern of strikes that had overwhelmed countless opponents. Valera evaded and redirected, using her smaller size and greater flexibility to slip through gaps in her sister's offense, never trying to match power with power, but instead flowing like water around stone. Minutes passed, and the murmuring in the crowd grew louder, because they were witnessing something unprecedented in the arena. The princess everyone had dismissed as worthless was holding her own against one of the Empire's greatest warriors. Not through strength, but through skill and determination. Jake watched with pride swelling in his chest as Valera executed techniques he had taught her. Each movement precise and purposeful. Each evasion buying precious seconds that stretched into minutes. Myra's attacks became more aggressive as frustration built inside her. Because this was supposed to be a quick and humiliating defeat that would remind everyone of her superiority. Instead, she was being made to look foolish by a sister she had always considered beneath her notice. Stand still and fight properly. Mira snarled as another strike missed its target. I am fighting properly, Valera replied. And there was something new in her voice. A steadiness that had never been there before. I am just not fighting the way you expected. The match continued for 12 incredible minutes before Myra finally landed a decisive blow. Her blade catching Valera across the ribs and sending her spinning to the ground. By Zarathian standards, Valera had lost the match. And Mira raised her arms in victory as the crowd offered polite applause. But the applause was muted. Because everyone in the arena understood what they had just witnessed. A princess who should have fallen in seconds had lasted 12 minutes against one of the best fighters in the Empire. And she had done it not through luck, but through genuine skill. Valera rose slowly from the ground. Blue blood trickling from her wound and her body aching from the impact. But her head remained high, and her eyes showed no shame. She found Jake in the crowd, and he gave her a small nod of approval. A gesture that said more than any words could express. 12 minutes against Myra was not a defeat in any meaningful sense. It was proof that everything they had worked for was real. The days that followed the sparring match brought changes that rippled through the entire court. Because the political calculations that had seemed so certain were suddenly thrown into question. Nobles who had ignored Valera for years now sought audiences with her. Curious about the princess who had transformed so dramatically under human guidance, Lord Corvin himself requested a private meeting. His manner respectful in a way it had never been. Before, I did not believe the human could accomplish anything meaningful, he admitted as they sat in his private chambers surrounded by trophies from a lifetime of battles. I was wrong, and I am not too proud to acknowledge that. Jake did not transform me into something new, Valera replied thoughtfully. He helped me discover what was already inside me waiting to be found. Meanwhile, Princess Mira grew increasingly agitated as she watched her sister's rising status. Because the easy path to succession that had always seemed guaranteed was now threatened by someone she had never considered a rival. She began spending more time with Lord Torvin, the Minister of Intelligence, whose own ambitions had long been frustrated by the current power structure. They spoke in private chambers with guards posted outside, and servants who passed too close were sent away with sharp words and threatening looks. Jake noticed these developments, but said nothing, choosing instead to focus on preparing Valera for the Ascension trials that would determine everything. Your combat skills have improved dramatically, he told her during a strategy session on day 65. But the trials test 5 different areas, and we need to make sure you are ready for all of them. The 5 disciplines were combat, strategy, leadership, endurance, and diplomacy. And each one would be judged by masters who had spent centuries evaluating royal candidates. I have always been told I am weak in everything, Valera said with the last traces of old doubt in her voice. That is because your strengths were never recognized or valued. Jake replied firmly, your empathy is not weakness. It is an incredible advantage in diplomacy and leadership. And your intelligence gives you natural ability in strategy. He looked at her with complete confidence in his eyes. You are not weak, Valera. You are different, and different is exactly what this empire needs. Day 73 began like any other morning, with Jake waking early to prepare for the training session ahead. But the sound of explosions shattered the peaceful silence and changed everything. Alarms screamed through the palace corridors as armed soldiers rushed past his quarters. And Jake grabbed the emergency weapon he had kept hidden and moved quickly toward the door. A young officer stopped him in the hallway, his blue face pale with shock and fear. "The eastern wing has been taken by rebels," the officer reported in a shaking voice. "Lord Torvin has betrayed the Empire, and his soldiers have captured Princess Valera." Jake's blood went cold as the terrible reality of the situation became clear. Because everything they had worked for over the past 73 days now hung by the thinnest thread. He was escorted to the throne room, where the Empress sat surrounded by her most trusted advisors. Her ancient face carved from stone, but her silver eyes burning with barely contained fury. "Lord Torvin holds my daughter hostage," she announced in a voice that could have frozen fire. "He demands that I name his son as heir and surrender my throne within 24 hours. And if I refuse, he will execute Valera publicly." The strategic situation was desperate, because Torvin had chosen his position perfectly, and any direct assault would almost certainly result in Valera's death before rescue could reach her princess. Mira stood nearby with an expression that was difficult to read, and Jake wondered briefly how much she had known about this conspiracy before it erupted into violence. "Let me go in," Jake said, stepping forward to address the Empress directly. Every head in the room turned toward him with expressions ranging from disbelief to contempt. One human against 300 Zerithian warriors? Lord Coven shook his massive head slowly. "You would be dead before you passed the first checkpoint. I am not planning to fight 300 warriors," Jake replied calmly. "I am planning to reach Valera and give her a chance to save herself." The Empress studied him with eyes that had witnessed countless crises over her long lifetime. "You believe in her abilities that strongly?" she asked with genuine curiosity beneath her royal composure. "I have spent 73 days watching her transform into someone extraordinary," Jake answered without hesitation. "She is stronger than anyone in this room understands, including herself, and all she needs is an opportunity to prove it." The infiltration began at midnight when the palace lights dimmed and the rebel guards relaxed their vigilance. Jake moved through maintenance tunnels and service passages that the conspirators had overlooked. His human eyes adjusted to the darkness and his feet silent on the metal floors. He encountered guards twice during his journey through the rebel-held territory, and both times he neutralized them quickly and quietly before they could raise any alarm. Years of special operations training had prepared him for exactly this kind of mission, and he moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done similar things many times before. He found Valera in a holding cell deep within the eastern wing, guarded by 4 soldiers who looked bored and overconfident. She was bound with energy restraints that glowed faintly in the dim light, and her face showed bruises from rough treatment. But her silver eyes were clear and focused when she saw him emerge from the shadows. "Jake?" she whispered with disbelief and hope mixing in her voice. "How did you get here?" "Humans are very stubborn," he replied as he worked quickly on her restraints. "We have maybe 3 minutes before someone notices the missing guards. And when I free you, we need to run." "Wait." Valera grabbed his arm as the restraints fell away from her wrists. "The security center for this entire wing is 2 levels above us, and Torvin controls all the doors and sensors from there." Jake understood immediately what she was suggesting, because controlling that center would change everything about their situation. "If we take the security center, we can lock down the rebels instead of them locking down us." Valera continued with tactical thinking that would have been impossible 3 months ago. "We can end this entire coup right here. There will be heavy guards," Jake warned her. "I know," Valera replied as she picked up a blade from one of the unconscious soldiers. And there was steel in her voice that made Jake proud. 73 days ago, I would have run away and hidden. But you taught me that fear is not the enemy. What is the enemy? He asked, wanting to hear her say it. Surrendering to fear is the enemy, she answered firmly. And I am done surrendering. They moved together through the rebel-held corridors, human and Xerithian working in perfect coordination, each one covering the other's weaknesses and amplifying their strengths. They encountered resistance twice on their way to the security center. And both times Valera fought with a ferocity that stunned the rebels who had expected a helpless prisoner. She moved differently now than she had in any training session, with a synthesis of Xarathian power and human technique that created something entirely new and devastating. The security center was guarded by 6 elite soldiers and Lord Torvin's son. A warrior nearly as skilled as Princess Myra Jake engaged 3 of the guards immediately, drawing their attention and their weapons. While Valera faced the remaining defenders, she fought without hesitation or doubt, using every technique Jake had taught her, and adding innovations of her own that emerged naturally from the heat of Torvin's son. Was the last to fall, brought down by a joint lock that twisted his arm until he screamed and dropped his weapon. Security is ours, Jake reported through a commandeered communication device. All rebel forces are now locked in their current positions, and the Empress may proceed with arrests at her convenience. The coup collapsed within hours as loyal soldiers swept through the eastern wing and captured rebels who could no longer escape or coordinate. Lord Torvin was arrested and would face execution for his treason, and his co-conspirators were rounded up throughout the palace. Princess Valera emerged from the crisis not as a victim but as a hero. The princess who had helped save her own life and her mother's throne. You did it, Jake said to her as they stood in the aftermath of victory, surrounded by defeated rebels and cheering soldiers. We did it, Valera corrected him with a tired smile. I could never have done any of this without you. Jake shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with warmth and pride. Everything I did was show you what was already inside you, because the strength and courage were always there waiting to be discovered. Day 100 arrived with brilliant sunshine streaming through the crystal towers of the Imperial Palace, and the entire Xarathian Empire had gathered to witness what everyone was calling the most anticipated Ascension trial in generations. Millions watched through broadcast screens across 40 star systems, because the story of the weak princess transformed by a human trainer had spread throughout the galaxy and captured the imagination of countless beings. Jake stood in the ceremonial viewing area wearing his dress uniform, feeling small among the towering Xerithians, but carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew exactly what he had accomplished. Princess Valera waited at the entrance to the trial grounds, dressed in the traditional white robes of an Ascension candidate, her pale blue skin almost glowing in the morning light. She looked nothing like the frightened girl who had trembled at their first meeting 100 days ago, because her posture radiated confidence and her silver eyes held steady as she surveyed the challenges ahead. The Empress rose from her throne to address the assembled crowd, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the massive arena. 100 days ago, I asked a human to attempt what our greatest trainers could not achieve, she announced in tones that carried the weight of history. Today, we witness the result of that experiment, and we shall see if it has succeeded. The Ascension trials began with the combat discipline, requiring Valera to face 3 opponents in sequence, with each one more skilled than the last. First warrior attacked with overwhelming aggression, clearly expecting to end things quickly against the princess. Everyone had once dismissed as worthless. Valera met his assault with the techniques Jake had taught her, flowing around his power strikes and finding openings in his defense. And within minutes, she had forced him to yield. The crowd erupted with cheers that shook the arena walls, because many of them had never believed they would see this day. The second opponent was more cautious, having watched what happened to the first. But Valera adapted her strategy and found different weaknesses to exploit, she won that match as well, earning another wave of thunderous applause from spectators who were witnessing something they would tell their children about for generations. The third opponent was a master warrior with decades of experience. And this fight was far more difficult than the previous 12. Valeera took several hard hits and gave ground multiple times. But she never stopped moving and never showed any sign of the fear that had once paralyzed her. The match ended in a draw, which by trial standards was counted as a pass. And Valeera moved on to the next discipline, with blue blood trickling from a cut above her eye, but her head held high. The strategy challenge presented her with a complex military scenario involving multiple enemy forces and limited resources. And she was given 1 hour to develop a plan that the judges would evaluate. She finished in half the allotted time, presenting a solution so creative and elegant that one of the ancient judges actually laughed with delight. "This is not how a Zarithian thinks," he observed with admiration rather than criticism. "But it is brilliant nonetheless." The endurance trial pushed her to physical limits that would have broken her just months earlier. A grueling obstacle course through harsh terrain and punishing conditions. She was not the fastest candidate to ever complete the course, but she finished without stopping and without asking for rest, a determination carrying her through moments when her body screamed for her to quit. The diplomacy simulation gave her the chance to showcase abilities that had been dismissed as weaknesses her entire life. Her empathy and intuition allowing her to navigate complex negotiations with remarkable skill. One of the judges, a legendary ambassador who had served the Empire for 3 centuries, stood and applauded when she finished. "I have evaluated thousands of candidates over my lifetime," he declared to the watching crowd, "and I have never seen such natural talent for understanding what others need." The leadership trial was the final challenge, requiring her to command a team of soldiers through a crisis simulation while the judges observed. Her every decision she led with a combination of confidence and compassion that earned the genuine respect of the soldiers under her command, treating them as partners rather than tools to be used. When the trials concluded, Valeera stood alone in the center of the arena while the judges gathered to determine her fate. Jake watched with his heart pounding in his chest, knowing that everything they had worked for over 100 days came down to this single moment. The head judge rose from his seat, his ancient face showing the weight of a decision that would shape the Empire's future. "Princess Valeera of the Third House," he announced in a voice that silenced every whisper in the vast arena, "you have demonstrated proficiency in all 5 disciplines of the Ascension trials. And by the standards of our Empire and the judgment of this council, you are hereby declared worthy of succession." The arena exploded with cheers that could probably be heard in orbit, and Jake found himself surrounded by Zarithians who wanted to shake his hand and ask questions about human training methods. He answered as best he could while his eyes searched for Valeera in the celebrating crowd. Wanting to see her face in this moment of ultimate triumph, she found him later when the ceremonies had ended and the crowds had departed, meeting him in the same garden where they had taken their first walk together 100 days ago. "I do not have words sufficient to express my gratitude," she said quietly, as they stood beneath the silver leaf trees. "You saved me, Jake, and I will never forget that." "I did not save you," he replied with a gentle shake of his head. "Everything I did was help you see what was already there inside you, because the strength and courage and intelligence were always yours." "How do humans do it?" she asked with wonder in her silver eyes. "How do you look at broken things and see possibility instead of failure?" Jake considered the question carefully before answering, wanting to give her something meaningful to carry forward. "Maybe because we have all been broken at some point in our lives," he said thoughtfully. "Humans do not have natural advantages like other species, so we survive by learning to fix ourselves. And once you learn that skill, you start seeing that everyone else can be fixed too. He smiled warmly at the princess, who had become so much more than a student to him. You were never broken, Valera. You were just waiting for someone to believe in you. His shuttle departed from Zareth Prime the following morning, carrying him away from the world he had helped transform. And his communication device was already filling with new requests from across the galaxy. The Grothian Federation had a young commander struggling with self-doubt. And the Silvari Collective had a scientist who froze under pressure. And a dozen other species had heard about what happened on Zareth Prime and wanted the same miracle for themselves. Jake settled into his seat and began reviewing the first file, knowing that another 100 days of work waited ahead of him, but that was what humans did best. Believing in potential and nurturing growth, and refusing to give up on anyone, no matter how hopeless their situation seemed. That was humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not weapons or technology, but simple, stubborn faith in the ability of all beings to become more than they were, and Captain Jake Morrison was just getting started.